Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. If you've been here for a while, you might recognise the avatar. This is how I started out on BookTube. I look like a zombie from The Walking Dead right now because I've got some sort of chest/throat/flu infection. And you might hear a little bit of my voice, but I still wanted to do a video this week talking about a book that I recently read. And this is part of my 24 BB challenge. This is a challenge to read 24 banned books in 2024 and was set up by the amazing MJ over at Reading This Live. I will link their channel down below. Please go give them a check out. The book I'm talking about today does have a history of book challenges, bannings and censorships, which is incredibly ironic when you consider that one of the things that this book does talk about is book burnings and book bannings, although it's not the only thing of interest in here. The book I'm talking about is none other than Fahrenheit 451 by Bradbury. This first came out in October of 1953. The version that I read was the 50th anniversary special, which is the one that you'll see on screen, and comes in at 227 pages long. With this being a challenged book review, the review process is slightly different. We're going to look at some of the challenge information that's up to date as of now from the PEN America website, so bannings from 2022 to 2023. We're then going to look a little bit at some of the historical censorship for this as well, because there's some quite interesting stuff in there. Before talking about some of the themes and some of the things that this talks about, I try and dig into why this may have actually been challenged or banned on occasion, before I give my final thoughts at the end of the video, and if I think that there's any grounds for this to have been censored or banned. So let's jump straight in first off with banning information. Before I get into my video proper, I want to do a massive shout out to Book Chat with Pat, who did an amazing video on this book a couple of months back. I actually moved it up my reading list because I think I originally had this pegged in for the back end of the year. So really well researched video, much better research than this one is. Highly recommend you go check it out if you haven't seen it already. It's absolutely amazing. I will link the video above and down below in the channel. Go give it a check out if you've not already. It's a really good video. Now, back to mine, censorship information. And as always, I've pulled from the index of school book bans from the PEN America website for 2022 to 2023. And there's some good and some bad news here. The good news is there's only one challenge within that period. And in fact, when I looked at the previous period as well, there was none. So, well done. We're not all banning this book by the looks of it. However, we do have the one challenge, and it's a repeat offender, who I think has been in every one of my banned book discussions so far. We're once again talking about Frisco Independent School District in Texas. The ban was, well, the challenge I should say, was made in March of 2023. It originated from the administration, and that's the one that really irks me. And I will at some point do a video to explain what the different origin of challenge information is on the PEN website as well. And as a result, the ban status for this one is that it is banned from libraries. Now, that being said, this book has a little bit of a history, and it's something that's really ironic considering some of the themes of the book. The first thing I want to talk about specifically, though, is the publisher, or the original publisher, Valentine Books, because they released an edition of this called the Bal High Edition, aimed at high school students, which made a number of changes to the book itself, with censorship of some of the verbiage, specifically words like hell, damn and abortion, with a modification of 75 passages in total within the book, and a change to 2 incidents. Now, for a period of time, both the Bal High Edition and the original edition were available to purchase. However, by 1973, only the Bal High Edition, or the censored version, was being published. This continued until 1979, when it was brought to the author's attention because Bradbury was not asked about this beforehand. and he became aware of it when a friend actually showed him the Balhai copy of the book, and he demanded that the censored version be withdrawn and replaced with the original. And in 1980, the original version once again became available. The afterword for the now once again available book, Bradbury did mention to the reader that it's not uncommon for publishers to expurgate an author's work or to censor it, but he himself will not tolerate the practice of what he called manuscript mutilation. The Balhai editions are now referred to by the publisher as the revised Balhai editions, just for note. Now, that's bad enough. The fact that the actual, and I didn't realise this was really a thing, that the actual publisher went behind the author's back and censored it themselves. Whilst I can see reasons for doing that occasionally in certain works if you're aiming it at a younger audience, there's nothing really in this book that would justify that. So, some question marks there, and I do wonder how widespread this practice is as well. Now, there have been other incidents, of course, over the years. For example, in South Africa during the apartheid, this was one of a number of books that was banned and therefore burned in the 50s and 70s. In 1987, it was given a third tier status by the Bay County School Board in Panama City, Florida, as part of a new 3-tier classification system, with a third tier being meant for books to be removed from classrooms due to a large amount of vulgarity. This entire censorship system was dropped after a class action lawsuit. 1992, Venado Middle School in California gave copies to students with the obscene words blacked out, which led to parents contacting the media and successfully getting the reinstallation of uncensored copies being given out to the pupils. 2006, there was a 10th grade high school student in Montgomery County, Texas, who demanded the book be banned from their daughter's English class list. This is after their daughter was assigned the book during Banned Books Week, but stopped reading after several pages due to what she considered offensive language and the descriptions of burning the Bible. They also didn't like the use of violence, the portrayal of Christians, and the depictions of firemen in the novel. Now, there's other instances above those, but they are the main ones. So there is a fair bit of history here with this book. But what does this book talk about? What is this book about? Why would it be banned? Let's take a look at some of the themes. Before we talk about the themes, we need to talk about what this book is about, and we're following the main character of Guy Montag, who is a fireman. This is a dystopia set in the future, and the job of a fireman here is not actually to put out fires, but more to light them, specifically book burnings, and potentially as well some of the people reading the books. 451 is the temperature at which paper burns, hence the title of the book, and it follows his personal journey when he meets a young lady called Clarisse, who's a child, I think she's only about 10, maybe a little bit older, and her childlike wonder kind of opens his eyes and pierces the veil, so to speak, that he's cocooned himself in with all the conformity and conditioning of his life up to that point, and it hits him to the point where he starts reading books and then gets a real thirst for knowledge and for something better, because of the feeling of, I'm not actually happy, I'm just being told that I'm happy. You very much get a sense of the same sort of thing that went into 1984 in terms of the language and the conditioning of people of taking the words away. If you don't know the words to express feelings, how do you express those feelings? And there's a level of censorship here that mirrors that. The interesting thing about this, though, is that the book bannings didn't necessarily come from on high, and there's actually a quote within the text which I'm going to paraphrase here. And this is a speech from Montag's chief, Captain Beatty, talking about the history of the firemen and how it's the people and not the state who are responsible for the book bans. So what he says is, the bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. No. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick. Thank God. And this fetches up the idea that actually the biggest thing that can be a threat to, not a threat to censorship, that can cause censorship is not necessarily what you think it's going to be. In this case, it's the idea of people sometimes just need a mindless escape. Everybody pretty much is guilty of going down YouTube or TikTok rabbit holes or doom scrolling on Twitter and not really achieving anything, and that is fine sometimes. There's nothing wrong with flicking on a movie just to pass the time and not having to engage your brain, because sometimes you do just need to zone out. But in a world that we live in now, you still need something to challenge your perceptions. And in this world, everybody is told that everything is great all the time. You have the constant positive reinforcement. And again, positivity is a great thing, but it has got to be balanced. Not everything is great, and sometimes you've got to accept and challenge back with stuff like this. And this is especially true if the media is easily accessible, first of all, in terms of just being able to see, read, watch it, and is controlled by a very select handful of organisations and or governments. And the whole idea of this is that mass media, basically what we class as streaming services today really, as well as the in-ear music stations, were so controlled by the government that anything that would cause controversy was stripped out, and therefore the idea of books which still contained these controversy, because they were a little bit harder to control by the government than radio and TV were, becomes uncomfortable. And the whole idea is to not be uncomfortable. So what do people do when they're uncomfortable with stuff? They eventually avoid it, and that avoidance leads to a de facto almost censorship of books themselves, and eventually a hostility towards them. And this then raises the dangers of then the illiterate society, because then you have the issue of having people who are not taught to critically think, and you end up with, for want of a better word, sheep. And I think this is a really important thing to talk about now, considering how much of our media and our news sites in particular are controlled by very, very ideologically narrow bands of organisations. For example, here in the UK, nearly all our newspapers are owned by Rupert Murdoch. BBC is regularly accused of bias. Now, there is a bias there. There's always a bias there. There's always going to be. But when you look at, say, in America, you have Fox News, which is incredibly biased as well, is well known for the fact. You have this subliminal messaging going on, and if you don't teach people to critically think, they will accept what they're being told, and it makes people easier to control. And I think going into this year in particular, where we're seeing the rise of book censorship as a side effect of some of this messaging that's going on, it's amazing how timely a book that was written 60 plus years ago is. I'm going to try and boil down my thoughts because I've been a little bit rambly today, I think is the best way to put it. So, first off, in terms of this being banned, I don't get it at all. The irony of banning a book that is very explicitly, at least in some way, about book banning and burning is baffling to me. It kind of proves the point of the book. But it's not the only point in this book. I would have no issue with any of my kids reading this in high school, which UK high school is 11 to 16 to anyone who's not from the UK. I do think younger audiences would find this a bit of a chore, if I'm completely honest. But again, Don't see any reason for this to be banned in libraries, and actually I do think this should be an option on a curriculum as classic literature to study. Much like 1984, there's a lot of stuff in here that correlates to the modern day really, really, really well in a way that's actually slightly disturbing how cyclical the nature of humanity is and how little we seem to learn and then go back to the same well of mistakes over and over again. Now, that being said, I didn't actually enjoy reading this book, and that's nothing to do with the theme, because I actually find the themes really, really interesting, and I find the character arcs really interesting as well, and the different perspectives. It comes down to the writing, and I've said this before on the channel, I do struggle quite a bit with classics. Don't know what it is, I just find them too dry for me because of the way language has changed over the period of time since they were written. And this was no exception, and I think I would have done better if I'd listened to an audiobook. But that being said, I do think this is a really important book that people should have access to. So, there we go. That's my thoughts on Fahrenheit 451. I'd love to know if you've read it. What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you soon.